All of you have come here out of your faith in and devotion for the genuine Dharma with great courage and diligence. I therefore feel most fortunate to have this opportunity to offer to you explanation of Saraha's Doha for the King, which is a teaching on Mahamudra. In general, His Holiness the 16th Karmapa caused the Buddha Dharma to flourish, and especially the teachings of our Karma Kagyu tradition. In particular, he was active in this country, the United States of America, and especially he had great aspirations for this community of Crestone. Because of various auspicious circumstances and through his great non-referential compassion and consummate wisdom, he commanded and inspired the creation of the stupa, which now graces the Crestone Valley. As you may know, there are in general 8 types of stupa, and from among these 8 types, the one that was built here is called Tashi Gomang, which means the auspicious many gates. This type of stupa principally commemorates the Buddha's opening or teaching of the various gates or aspects of Buddha Dharma. Because of the auspiciousness of that stupa's presence here, I feel that Dharma will flourish in this place or this area, and therefore I feel quite confident that presenting instruction in Mahamudra here in the area of that stupa will be definitely beneficial. And I again thank you for making this possible. The Bhagavat, the Samyak Sambuddha, taught 84,000 different aspects of Dharma, which include the various vehicles such as the Shravakayana, the Bodhisattvayana, and the Vajrayana. The proper practice of any one of these teachings leads eventually to the state of liberation and finally omniscience, and in the short term will pacify adversity. From among these 84,000 different teachings, the one that has been selected as the principal emphasis of the Kagyu tradition, starting from the time of Tilopa and Naropa and up to the present day with our own gurus, is the practice and teaching of Mahamudra. We therefore possess uncommonly profound instructions concerning this practice, and we consider this practice to be of the utmost great benefit and also the most convenient or easy aspect of Dharma to actually implement. We therefore believe that the practice of Mahamudra in our tradition has produced more siddhas than any other tradition. Especially nowadays, and most particularly in the context of Dharma flourishing in the West, I think that Mahamudra is even more appropriate and even more fitting than it was in the past. Many Westerners practice Dharma out of great interest and devotion, and I feel that the only aspect of these teachings that will actually satisfy their hopes and aspirations is Mahamudra. When people practice Dharma, their individual circumstances very much affect what they can and will do. Some people are able to practice with great intensity and great diligence in long retreats. Other people who have the same degree of faith and interest nevertheless lack the opportunity for such intense and prolonged practice. In teaching Dharma, in presenting instruction, one must fulfill the needs and hopes of both types of practitioner. Some people possess the resources and circumstances through which they can become monastics and devote their lives to practice, and other people do not. Some people possess the circumstances and resources through which they can practice in long, intense retreats, and others do not. But all of these types of practitioners, without any exception, 100% of them, are devoted to Dharma, and therefore I think there is a way in which all can equally benefit from Dharma practice and all can actually practice it. And I think that there is no better system or instruction for practice for all practitioners than Mahamudra. Since nowadays many students have great faith and devotion for the practice of Dharma and the practice of Mahamudra in particular, it's necessary that they have access to the proper texts of instruction. Now, all along, the uncommon practical instructions of the Kagyu lineage have existed. But up until recently, there has been a barrier between them and Western students, which has been the barrier of language. The instructions existed, but existed only in Tibetan. Nowadays, these are being translated through the diligent effort of Western students. For example, the Moonbeams of Mahamudra by Dogpo Tashi Namgyal and Illuminating the Natural State by the same author have been translated, as have the 3 great commentaries on Mahamudra by the 9th Jawang Karmapa, The Ocean of the Definitive Meaning, Eliminating the Darkness of Ignorance, and Pointing out the Dharmakaya. Because these texts exist now in English as a resource for practice, students can encounter and study these texts, and these texts themselves are eminently practical. They are not cryptic, nor are they in any way inaccessible. And they provide appropriate solutions and responses to the various types of experience, good and bad, that students come up with in their practice. And therefore, through the translation of these texts, we now have the necessary resource for Mahamudra practice. The text of instruction that I'm going to use here is Saraha's Doha for the King. Now, as you may know, our lineage of Mahamudra instructions began in 2 ways. One we call the long lineage, and one we call the short lineage. The short lineage, which is slightly better known, goes from the Dharmakaya, Vajradhara, to Tilopa, to Naropa, Marpa, and so on. The long lineage, which is found in many lineage supplications and so forth, passed from the Dharmakaya Vajradhara to the Bodhisattva Ratnamati, to the Mahasiddha Saraha, from him to Nagarjuna, and so on, and eventually down to Marpa in the same way. So Saraha is a figure in our lineage in what is called the long lineage of Mahamudra instructions. Saraha was born in the Brahmin caste, and he became a Buddhist monastic, at which time he was known as Rahula Bhadra. And he was a very influential and highly respected teacher of Buddhism within the monastic tradition. As such, he enjoyed the patronage and the devotion and faith of a certain king and his subjects. At one time, while still engaged in teaching and practicing, Saraha encountered a wisdom dakini who appeared in the form of a human woman of a very low social class. And remember that at that time in India, social class and caste were considered of great importance. This woman was a fletcher or arrow maker, and he encountered her at a crossroads where she was making arrows. He began to accompany her and traveled around in her company and practiced and lived in her company, which greatly disappointed the king and his subjects. So in order to convince Saraha to return to a more conventional and monastic lifestyle, the king eventually sent a deputation of his subjects to ask Saraha to behave. Saraha's response to their request or petition is what is known as the Doha for the people, which is the first of the 3 great or famous Dohas sung by Saraha. The Doha for the people is a fairly long song or Doha which presents instruction in Mahamudra in the vernacular of southern India of that time. Through hearing Saraha's teaching, the people in that deputation all generated great experience and realization, and therefore they stopped asking him to behave. When they returned to the court of the king observed that they had been unsuccessful, so he then thought that he would send a second deputation, which was made up of the queen and her retinue servants. Again, the queen and her retinue asked Saraha to behave, and this time his response was the second Doha, the Doha for the queen. And in response to his teaching, the queen and her retinue, like the people before, generated authentic experience and realization, stopped pestering Saraha, and returned to the court. The king, observing that both the deputation from the people and the deputation from the queen had been unsuccessful, went himself and asked Saraha to behave. Saraha's response to the king's petition is this Doha, the Doha for the king. It consists of 40 stanzas. Upon hearing it, the king immediately attained supreme siddhi. So these are the three Dohas of Saraha: the Doha for the people, the Doha for the queen, and the Doha for the king. Of these three, I'm going to present the Doha for the king. Our sources for Mahamudra instruction consist in part of Indian Dohas, such as the three Dohas of Saraha, the Mahamudra Upadesha of Tilopa, and many other similar songs of realization. They also consist in part of Tibetan commentaries, such as the Ocean of Definitive Meaning. Now, the commentaries and the Dohas have the same outlook, and they essentially present the same thing. They have the same meaning. But there is a great difference in how this is presented. In the great commentaries, which are very systematic, there is a gradual, systematic, and clear presentation of Mahamudra instruction from the very beginning of the path and up to its end. The Dohas, on the other hand, are not systematic and gradual in this way, because the circumstances in which the Dohas were first sung was usually that when a Mahasiddha would generate realization, they would spontaneously express that realization through the intolerable or uncontrollable bliss of the realization itself. Therefore, the Dohas are more an expression of personal realization than a gradual or systematic presentation of the path. For example, in commentaries such as the Ocean of Definitive Meaning, you will find a gradual presentation of how first to practice tranquility, and then upon the basis of that to begin to practice insight, and so on. The Dohas don't usually present the path in such a gradual or sequential manner. Therefore, in studying the Dohas, you need the support of the great texts of instruction, such as the Ocean of Definitive Meaning. But nevertheless, the essential point or essential meaning of all of the instruction is still found in the Dohas themselves. Now, what exactly is presented in the Doha for the king? How is Mahamudra taught here? Essentially, Mahamudra in this Doha is presented as having three aspects: a ground, path, and fruition. So the Doha answers the questions: what is the ground or basis of Mahamudra practice? What is the path or process of that practice? And what is its result? The ground here is how things are. This is to say that the way we experience, that is to say the way things appear, is regarded as bewildered appearance or bewildered experience. It is what we call mundane or samsaric appearances. That is how things appear. But what are they? As opposed to what appears to us, how are things in their abiding nature? In other words, what lies behind bewildered appearances? This must be recognized, this nature, how things are, because it is the very excellence of this ground itself that makes the path possible. So therefore, the first subject of our text is an explanation of the ground or basis, that which is to be realized, how things really are. And that explanation is the explanation of ground Mahamudra. How this is realized, the process of realizing it, is path Mahamudra. And the state of realization, the culmination of that path, is fruition Mahamudra. In terms of structure, in the Doha for the king, these three, ground, path, and fruition, are initially summarized or presented briefly, and then after that, they are subsequently presented extensively using various analogies. The Sanskrit term Mahamudra was translated by Mahasiddhas and great translators into Tibetan as Chaja Chempo. And if we consider the literal meaning of the parts or elements of the Tibetan translation, this can actually be of practical use in understanding what Mahamudra is all about. Usually, when a symbolic etymology or explanation of Chagya Chempo is given, it's said that Chak represents great emptiness and Ja, non-dual wisdom. This is, on first glance, somewhat cryptic because there is no obvious connection between the Tibetan word Chak and emptiness and the Tibetan word Ja and non-dual wisdom. In most usage, the word Chak is an honorific term for someone's hand. And in most usage, the term Ja either means vast as an adjective or a seal as a noun. Well, if we look at the word Chak, the first thing we see about it is that it's a word that is used a lot in Tibetan. For example, the word for salutation or prostration is Chaktsarwa. And also, as was mentioned, it is the honorific term for hand. Therefore, when you speak of the Buddha's hand, you use the honorific word Chak rather than the ordinary word Lakpa. Or for anyone else about whom you wish to use honorifics. For teachers, monarchs, ministers, those you regard as having particularly great merit, and so on. Nevertheless, the word Chak has another usage. When it is not used as an honorific for hand, in and of itself, it actually has the connotation of clean or cleansing. For example, a broom is often called a chakma, which literally means a cleanser. Now, the reason why that word, which has the connotation of cleansing, was selected as the honorific for hand is the understanding that that which comes from the hands of Buddhas or Mahasiddhas, such as their writings, their actions and deeds, have the primary function of cleansing, purifying, or removing the misery and obscuration of disciples and beings. Now, if we return to the idea of great emptiness, it's now possible to see a connection between the word Chak and the state of emptiness. All things are empty in their nature, and it is through not recognizing that we suffer, that we experience samsara. Therefore, if this nature, if emptiness is recognized, that recognition removes or cleanses all suffering. So therefore, it is emptiness and the recognition of emptiness that cleanse us of suffering. To signify that, therefore, the symbolic explanation for the word chak here is great emptiness as the factor which purifies or removes suffering. The word ja, the second syllable, usually means either that which is vast, so can imply extent, or a seal. Now, the connection between the idea of a seal and the idea of vast is the idea of an imprint. For example, a handprint, which not only depicts the hand or represents the hand, but shows the extent of the hand. So, an extent or imprint of something shows what that thing fills or pervades. The second syllable here, therefore, represents the fact and points out the fact that while emptiness is indeed the nature of all things, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is at the same time non-dual wisdom. That is to say, emptiness itself has an innate aspect of lucidity. So therefore, the second syllable points out or stipulates that emptiness is an expanse of wisdom. Emptiness is pervaded by or filled with wisdom. And then the second word of two syllables, Khenpo, which means great, means that this expanse of wisdom, which is emptiness, is great in the sense of all-pervasive. In that way, it's quite clear that Mahamudra is concerned with meditation on emptiness, as was taught by the Buddha. But when we use the term emptiness, we may understand it in different ways. Possibly we may see emptiness as something positive, but we may see it as something that is an utter absence of quality, an absence of experience and even of cognition, as a state of utter or absolute nothingness. That is not what emptiness is, and therefore it is necessary that the inherent lucidity, or the aspect of lucidity of emptiness, be pointed out. Because emptiness is at the same time great wisdom. It is the root of all benefit for beings, and it is the potential and source of all knowledge or wisdom that knows the nature of things. So therefore, while the nature that is to be realized is emptiness, that nature itself possesses inherent lucidity or wisdom. Therefore, the instructions for realizing this nature, including its inherent wisdom, constitute what we call Mahamudra. Our text begins with its name given first in the Indian language and then in translation. And then there is the Tibetan translator's salutation. All of this is fairly straightforward, and you can understand it simply by, they have this, right? Yeah. You can understand it simply by reading it, so I don't need to explain it. I'm actually going to start with the part of the text the first part of the text that was actually composed by Saraha, and that is Saraha's initial homage. So in the, they have the same pages? Yeah. So it's on page 2, the first highlighted text on page 2. The homage reads, "I prostrate to the one who has vanquished the power of the Maras." Here, the one who has vanquished the power of the Maras can be understood as referring to Mahamudra itself, which is that which possesses the power to vanquish the Maras. Now, the term Mara is used in common parlance to refer to external demons. But in its fundamental meaning, according to the Buddhist tradition, it actually refers to what are called the 4 Maras. Mara, in general, is defined as a factor that causes someone to suffer themselves and to bring suffering to others as well. Anything that brings unhappiness and suffering. And there are 4 of these. The first in the usual sequence of enumeration is called klesha mara, which means the mara that is mental affliction. And this is the presence within us of the various kleshas: attachment, aversion, and apathy, the 3 and 5 kleshas, and so forth. These cause us a lot of suffering ourselves, and also the presence in one person of these kleshas can also cause suffering to others. So therefore, it is these things that need to be conquered. Now, we also possess the aggregates, the 5 skandhas: form, sensation, perception, concept, and consciousness. These constitute the second mara, which is therefore called skandha mara, or the mara of the aggregates. As long as we possess the aggregates, we suffer. For example, through possessing the aggregate of form, we undergo birth, aging, sickness, and death. So therefore, the aggregates also need to be conquered. The third mara is the mara that is the lord of death, or that which brings death. And this is conquered if you conquer or get rid of the aggregates, since death is caused by the affliction or presence of the aggregates themselves. Now, these 3 maras, when they are depicted in iconography, are depicted in the case of the first, klesha mara, as a venerable Brahmin. In the case of the second, skandha mara, as someone afflicted with extreme old age and infirmity. And in the case of the third, the mara that brings death, as a demonic and terrifying being. The way that you free yourself from these 3 maras is through the practice of Dharma. And that which prevents or obstructs the practice of Dharma, obstructs the process of freeing yourself from these 3, is the 4th mara, which is called Devaputra mara, or the mara that is the child of the gods. Now, child of the gods sounds delightful. And in accordance with that, when this is depicted, it's depicted as a very attractive person or being. Devaputra mara is desirable things, pleasant forms, things pleasing to the eye, pleasant sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. All of these things seem good to us, and therefore are perceived as attractive. But it is through craving for these things and fixation on their characteristics that we are prevented from conquering the other 3 maras. So therefore, there are 4 maras that need to be conquered. And if these are conquered, that is to say, if these afflictions and so forth are removed, we achieve liberation from samsara and the full revelation of our spontaneously present wisdom. So therefore, Mahamudra here is praised or saluted as that which conquers all 4 maras and thereby brings liberation and omniscience. I'm going to stop with the teaching for this morning, and now for the rest of the session we'll meditate together briefly.